2,000 years ago, the Romans built the richest empire on earth, and then bankrupted themselves with the same financial mistakes we're making today. They knew that money is never neutral. It's a weapon, a promise, and a lie, all at once. You see, the Romans lived by certain rules, unspoken laws about how wealth, debt, and value actually worked. These rules weren't taught in schools. They were learned through war, crisis, and collapse. These were the money rules of empire, the lessons that built Rome and the mistakes that destroyed it. And every single one of them still applies today. At its height, around the 2nd century AD, the Roman Empire stretched from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. It ruled over a quarter of humanity, more than 60 million people, united under one currency and one language. Its economy was vast and vibrant. Trade ships carried grain from Egypt, glass from Syria, and silk from China. Ports and forums buzzed with commerce, the treasury swelled with tribute from conquered lands, and citizens believed their money, stamped with the emperor's face, was eternal. The Roman denarius was as trusted as the modern dollar. Until it wasn't. In the beginning, Roman money was solid, literally. Silver and gold with real weight and intrinsic value. When a Roman paid for bread, he paid with metal mined, refined, and struck by the state. It wasn't abstract. Labor had been condensed into coin, the lifeblood of the empire made tangible. But as Rome expanded, that same money became the empire's greatest weapon, and eventually, its curse. The wealth of the empire didn't come from productivity or innovation, it came from conquest. New territories brought new slaves, new mines, and new taxes. War paid for itself, as long as Rome kept winning. But what happens when you build an economy on expansion, and expansion stops? The Romans found out the hard way, through financial illusion. As conquests slowed, the state needed new ways to honor its promises. It borrowed, taxed, and manipulated its currency, using finance to paper over decline. And while emperors and generals grew rich, ordinary citizens were slowly crushed under the weight of debt, inflation, and corruption. Sound familiar? The fall of the Roman Empire wasn't a single event, it was a long, slow unraveling of financial trust. Yet the Romans weren't blind to it. Their greatest minds, philosophers, statesmen, and historians, saw it happening in real time and wrote about it with brutal clarity. Cato the Elder preached thrift and discipline, warning that a republic obsessed with luxury would rot from within. Cicero wrote that greed corrupts a nation faster than invasion. Seneca warned that wealth is the slave of the wise man and the master of the fool. And Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king himself, reminded his people that fortune is never freedom, only temptation. These weren't lofty moral lectures, they were economic diagnoses. Rome's moral decay was its fiscal policy. The paradox was simple: the more Rome grew, the more it needed to feed its appetite for wealth. The state became a machine of consumption, taxing the provinces to pay the legions, looting conquered lands to pay the debt, and minting coins to fund its promises. And every coin it struck carried a message more powerful than any speech or law. The Romans lived, and died, by their money rules. 5 of them defined the empire's rise and foretold its fall. And every one of them echoes through the world we live in today. Rule 1: all money is political. The Romans knew something modern economists pretend to forget: money is never neutral. It's not just a tool for trade, it's a declaration of power. Every coin they minted was a message. And every message said the same thing: this empire exists because I, the emperor, say so. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, understood the psychological power of currency better than any ruler in history. When he emerged victorious from years of civil war, he didn't just rebuild the state, he rebuilt trust. His solution wasn't a speech. It was a coin. He flooded the empire with silver denarii bearing his face and the word pax, peace. Every marketplace, every pocket, every transaction reminded Romans who had restored order. During Nero's reign, after half of Rome burned down, he needed to rebrand himself from monster to savior. His coins suddenly displayed temples being rebuilt and symbols of abundance. Money was propaganda. It told people the empire was thriving even when the streets were still in ashes. Under Trajan, coins became military press releases, celebrating victories in Dacia and Parthia. Images of conquered kings and piles of gold weren't decoration, they were proof that conquest still worked. Every denarius was a miniature empire, a pocket-sized promise of prosperity. But beneath the shine, Rome was already addicted to its own illusion. Coins no longer represented wealth, they manufactured it. The emperor's face wasn't just a guarantee of value, it was a reminder of obedience. The message was clear: your wealth exists because your ruler exists. Rule 2: Debt is power. Rome was built on credit. Every layer of its society, from farmers to emperors, ran on borrowed money. Citizens borrowed to buy land, slaves, and seed. Merchants borrowed to fund voyages across the Mediterranean. Generals even borrowed to raise armies, betting their futures on victory. Debt wasn't a problem, it was the engine. But it came with chains. When a borrower defaulted, the creditor could seize property, or freedom. Indebted citizens could be sold into slavery. Families were broken. Rebellions were born. The Roman elite learned early that lending wasn't just profitable, it was political. Credit was a tool to control the population without sending soldiers. By Julius Caesar's time, the entire republic was suffocating under debt. Interest rates soared to 12%. Senators mortgaged estates to fund campaigns. Ordinary Romans sold their children into servitude. Caesar, ever the strategist, saw opportunity. When he seized power in 49 BC, one of his first acts was partial debt cancellation. Not out of mercy, out of calculation. Rule 3: Luxury is a virus. The Romans began with simplicity, and ended with spectacle. In the early republic, wealth was measured in land and virtue. Founding fathers like Cincinnatus worked their own fields and wore plain wool tunics. Luxury was weakness. The Senate even passed sumptuary laws limiting how much gold a woman could wear or how many guests a man could invite. But conquest changed everything. After defeating Carthage and looting the East, Rome's elites became fabulously wealthy. Villas were filled with Greek statues, Egyptian jewelry, and imported slaves. Gold leaf ceilings replaced wooden roofs. Dinner parties lasted all night. Cato the Elder condemned luxury as a sickness eating the bones of the republic. By the 2nd century, Rome had a trade deficit even its armies couldn't fix. Imported silk replaced local cloth. Coins poured into Asia to pay for exotic goods. Once luxury became culture, restraint was impossible. Rome's downfall didn't start with invasion, it started with appetite. Rule 4: Inflation destroys empires. If debt was Rome's addiction, inflation was its overdose. For centuries, the denarius, that small silver coin, was the most trusted currency. But when wars stopped paying for themselves, the math stopped working. Armies demanded wages. Bureaucracies demanded salaries. Citizens demanded bread. The emperor's solution: debase the coin. Nero reduced the silver content by about 10%. Caracalla reduced it further. By Diocletian's time, the denarius was barely 1% silver. Prices skyrocketed. Merchants refused imperial coins. Soldiers demanded gold or goods. Ordinary Romans watched their savings turn to dust. Today, we don't clip silver, we print digital money. The method changed, not the outcome. Inflation, then and now, undermines trust. Rule 5: when people stop believing in money, they stop believing in power. By the 4th century, the Roman monetary system had died. The denarius was worthless. Taxes were collected in grain. Armies were paid in land, food, or loot. Trade collapsed. Cities shrank. Citizens returned to barter. The empire didn't run out of money, it ran out of belief. Barbarians didn't destroy Rome. They merely entered the vacuum left by inflation. Civilizations fall not through invasion, but through erosion. Not with swords, but with spreadsheets. When people lose faith in the system, they stop defending it. The Romans saw money as moral. Wealth tested a man's character. Cato said it, Seneca repeated it, Marcus Aurelius lived it. When a civilization worships money, it becomes enslaved to it. Today, we confuse credit with creation, consumption with culture, speculation with progress. We praise billionaires, technocrats, and market makers as saviors, when they're really just symptoms. Rome already ran this experiment. They built the world's greatest empire, debased its currency, drowned in debt, and called it destiny. History doesn't repeat, it just wears new costumes. Romans wore togas. We wear suits. Denarius became the dollar. The result will be the same if we forget the rules. Money isn't just currency, it's character. And when society forgets that, collapse stops being a question of if and becomes a question of when. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, I'll show you where to look.